The girl had grown used to blending into the background. Every afternoon, while her mother worked her cleaning shift at the Cultural Arts Center, she sat quietly in a far corner of the lobby with her small backpack and an old pair of earphones that barely worked. Most people who passed by didn't bother to look at her. She was simply there, like a forgotten piece of furniture. And she didn't mind it much. She had learned long ago that being invisible was sometimes easier. But even though she looked like she was scrolling on her old phone, she was hardly ever paying attention to the screen. Her mind was always somewhere else, somewhere filled with notes and sounds and melodies she didn't know how to explain. Songs she created in her head without meaning to. Music that lived inside her like it had been waiting for a moment to escape. The Art Center was a place full of movement and voices. Some days it was filled with children running from dance classes to drama workshops. Other days it was quiet and serious, especially when the older students practiced for recitals. The girl had watched them many times from afar. She could not see everything, but she could always hear. The sound of the piano was her favorite. It made her chest feel strange in a way she didn't have words for. She never learned any musical terms, and she didn't know what chords or scales were. But somehow she understood the feeling behind each note. When someone played softly, it felt like warm wind on her face. When someone played fast or loudly, it felt like running barefoot on pavement. When she heard a sad melody, she sometimes held her breath without realizing it. Her mother didn't know any of this. She was too busy working long hours to notice how her daughter would stiffen, freeze, or even smile at certain sounds drifting from the practice rooms. And the girl never mentioned it, partly because she didn't want to bother her mother, and partly because she didn't think it mattered. Music was something other kids had the time and privilege for. Kids who wore neat clothes and carried shiny instrument cases. Kids who called the Arts Center their second home, not a place they waited in while their parent mopped hallways. Every time she walked through the building with her mother, the girl would slow down near the grand hall. The hall had a tall ceiling and gold lights that hung like floating lanterns. Even when it was empty, it felt alive. And at the far end of it stood a piano she had admired for years. Black, polished, beautiful. It wasn't just big. It seemed important, like it held stories inside it. She never touched it, even though she always wanted to. She would stand near the doorway, listening to students who sat at the piano and played pieces they were learning for competitions. Some were good. Some made mistakes. Some were loud and confident. Some were so nervous their hands shook on the keys. The girl never laughed at their mistakes. Instead, she studied them. She listened again and again, memorizing patterns without trying to. When a student paused and repeated a bar, she would silently tap her fingers on her leg, echoing the same rhythm. But no one noticed her quiet fascination. Most staff members saw her mother and greeted her politely. But few even realized the girl had been coming there almost every day for years. One afternoon, while she sat on the same bench she always chose, a group of older students passed by. They were dressed neatly, each carrying folders filled with sheet music. The girl kept her gaze low, hoping they wouldn't bother her. But one of them slowed down. "Are you waiting for your mom again?" The student asked, not unkindly, but with a hint of amusement. She nodded quietly. Another student laughed softly. "You probably get bored out of your mind here." She shook her head. "It's okay. What do you even do?" The first one asked. "You don't look like you're doing homework." The girl hesitated. "I just listen." "To what?" "The piano." This made the students smile at each other, as if they found her answer funny. "Listening isn't the same as playing. You know," one of them said. "Those keys are harder than they look." The girl nodded again, not wanting to continue the conversation. "You should try it sometime," another joked. "If you can even figure out where to put your hands." They laughed gently, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. To them, the piano was a world far too complicated for someone like her. Someone with no teacher, no lessons, no books, and no practice hours. After they walked off, she breathed slowly, trying not to feel embarrassed. She knew they weren't trying to be unkind. They just didn't know her. They didn't know the way she heard things. They didn't know she could hum full piano pieces, even without touching a key. As the evening grew quieter, she watched the workers clean the lobby and adjust the event posters for the next morning. She checked the time. Her mother still had at least an hour of work left. She stood up and stretched her legs. The building was calm now, almost empty. Most students had gone home, and the teachers were preparing to leave. The girl walked slowly down the long hallway that led to the grand hall. She wasn't planning to go inside. She just liked standing near the entrance. It made her heart feel full in a way she didn't understand. But when she reached the door, she froze. The lights inside were on. The piano sat in the center of the stage, glowing under warm golden lamps. And the room was completely empty. She glanced around. No one was nearby. The cleaning crew was on the other side of the building. Her mother was working in the supply room. Even the security guards seemed to be taking a break somewhere. She stepped inside as quietly as she could, as if the air itself might shatter if she breathed too loudly. The hall felt different when it was silent, larger, more magical. The piano was right there, close enough to touch. She walked toward it, each step slow and careful. She didn't know why she felt nervous. She had seen it so many times before, but standing beside, it felt like standing next to something sacred. She reached out her hand and pulled it back instantly. Her mother always told her, "Look with your eyes, not with your hands," especially in places like this. But the hall was empty. No one was watching. And she didn't want to play anything. She just wanted to feel one key. Just to know what it was like. Her fingertip hovered above a single white key. She took a breath and pressed down. A soft sound escaped, gentle, pure, almost fragile. The girl closed her eyes. It felt like she had opened a door she wasn't meant to open. A door she had waited years to reach. She pressed another key. Then another. The notes came out like small whispers at first. But something inside her shifted. Something brave. Something hungry. She sat down slowly on the piano bench. Her heart thumped so loudly she wondered if the whole hall could hear it. Her hands moved on their own. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't question. She just played what she remembered. What she had listened to dozens of times from the doorway. What she had stored in her mind like a secret treasure. The melody flowed out of her, shaky at first, but growing steadier with every second. She felt the music more than she understood it. Her hands found patterns without her searching for them. Her fingers moved faster, matching the tune she had admired for so long. She didn't see the door in the back quietly open. She didn't hear the footstep far behind her. She didn't notice the first person who paused in surprise. She was lost in the sound, in the feeling, in the moment she had dreamed of, but never dared to imagine. And within seconds, the notes she played, those simple, startling notes, began to draw others toward the hall without her knowing it. The girl did not even realize how deep she had fallen into the music until her own fingertips began to tingle. The hall around her had disappeared from her mind. She was not thinking about the stage, the lights, or the possibility of someone walking in. She was only thinking about the sound that poured out from beneath her hands, as if it had been trapped inside her for years and suddenly found a way to breathe. When she finished the first melody, she hesitated. The last note hung in the air like a fading echo. She looked down at her hands, almost surprised by what they had done. For a moment, She thought that maybe she had imagined everything, that maybe the music had only existed in her head, but she was not dreaming. She was sitting at the piano she had admired from afar for so long, and she had played it like it belonged to her. Her heart raced, but in a warm, excited way, not in fear. For once she felt something she didn't have a name for. It was not joy, not pride, something deeper, something that felt like she had touched a piece of herself she didn't know existed. She lifted her hands to play again, softer this time, testing another tune she remembered from listening outside the practice rooms. She pressed a few keys slowly, and added more. The notes came easier, flowing together like they had been waiting inside her fingers. Behind her, someone stepped a little closer. The girl didn't hear it. She was too lost in the rhythm. The person stood silently, listening with a stunned expression, unsure how a child with no training could play with such natural feeling. A few seconds later, another person entered, curious about the sound drifting through the hallway. Soon after, a third person paused at the door. None of them spoke. They didn't want to break whatever moment was happening. The girl continued to play, unaware of anyone around her. The soft lights above the stage gave her a warm glow, and her small shoulders moved gently as she leaned into the music. Every note came from memory, from feeling, from something silent inside her that finally found a voice. She didn't think about being wrong. She didn't think about being watched or judged. She didn't think about how she had no right to be there. She only thought about the melody and how it made her chest feel full every time the tune shifted. After a while, her fingers drifted into a different pattern, one she had made up completely on her own. It wasn't something she had heard from the students. It wasn't something she remembered from anywhere. It was hers. She pressed one key, listened to the sound, then let her hands follow a new rhythm. The melody rose slowly, then dipped into a soft pattern that almost sounded like the whisper of wind. She didn't know what she was doing, but somehow her hands did. The people behind her exchanged glances. The first person had goosebumps on their arms. The second whispered something under their breath, unable to understand how a girl this young could play with such emotion. The third simply stared, eyes filling with surprise. The girl kept playing. For a few minutes, time seemed to stretch. The hall felt more like a dream than a real place. The notes echoed softly, bouncing off the high ceiling and filling every corner of the room. Finally, the girl lifted her fingers and let the last note fade. She took a quiet breath. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sensation of finally doing something she had always longed for. She slowly looked up and stared at the piano keys. A small smile touched her lips. She didn't know why, but she felt lighter, as if playing had released all the emotions she never knew how to speak. She was about to try another melody when she suddenly felt something, like a presence. She stiffened, her eyes widened, and she turned her head slightly. That was when she noticed the faint reflection on the glossy surface of the piano. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but then she clearly saw, moving behind her. Her heart jumped. The girl spun around on the bench. At least 5 people were standing inside the hall. She froze. For a moment, no one said anything. They simply stared at her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and deep curiosity. One woman near the back held a notebook. A man to her right still had his hands in his pockets, but he looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Another person held a small case, probably for an instrument, and stood completely still, watching her with wide eyes. The girl felt heat rush to her face. Her stomach tightened. She stood up quickly, her legs trembling. I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping away from the piano. "I didn't mean to touch it. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked at the end. The first person stepped forward carefully. their expressions softening as if approaching a frightened animal. "It's okay," they said gently. The girl shook her head. "I shouldn't have played it. I know I'm not allowed. Please don't tell my mom. She could get in trouble." Her hands twisted nervously at her sides. The man with the instrument case took a slow step forward. "How long have you been playing?" he asked quietly. She stared at the floor. I don't play. Not really." "You just did," he said softly. She swallowed hard. "I only know from listening. That's all. I didn't mean to upset anyone." Another woman spoke up, her voice calm but filled with amazement. "Who taught you those pieces?" "No one. You learned them all by ear?" The girl nodded slowly, still avoiding everyone's gaze. The hall was silent for a moment. One of the listeners stepped closer. "Do you know how rare that is?" The girl hesitated, unsure how to answer. She didn't know anything about music theory, or talent, or difficulty. She only knew how the piano made her feel. And suddenly, staring at the faces around her, she felt small, like she had done something terribly wrong. Her throat tightened, and she wished she could disappear before anyone could speak again. Her mother appeared at the entrance of the hall. She was holding a cleaning cloth and looked tired, like she had been rushing from one room to another. But when she saw her daughter standing on the stage, surrounded by several people, she froze. "What happened?" her mother asked, fear rising in her voice. The girl's heart sank. She rushed off the stage toward her mother. "I'm sorry," she blurted. "I just touched the piano for a moment. I didn't mean to. I won't do it again. Please don't be mad." Her mother looked confused, then worried. She put her hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. "I told you not to go near anything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If someone complains, I could lose my job." One of the people stepped forward quickly, shaking their head. No, please don't worry. There's no trouble here." Her mother frowned slightly, unsure whether to believe them. Another person added, "Your daughter. She played beautifully." The mother blinked. "Played?" The man nodded. "Yes, she has a remarkable ear. Truly remarkable." The mother looked down at her daughter with disbelief in her eyes. "You played?" The girl lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. Her mother didn't know what to say. For a moment, she seemed lost, like she was trying to understand something too big to fit in her mind. The listeners exchanged glances with each other. They knew what they had witnessed was rare. Very rare dot, and none of them were ready to walk away. The hall felt strangely silent after the last words faded. The girl stood close to her mother, almost hiding behind her, her fingers gripping the edge of her mother's sleeve. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, as if the entire room held its breath. Her mother looked from person to person, unsure what to make of all the eyes focused on them. She gently pulled her daughter closer, as if expecting someone to suddenly accuse them of breaking rules or damaging something valuable. One of the listeners stepped forward again, this time slower, almost cautious. The girl noticed how carefully they chose their words. "We didn't come here to complain," the person said softly. "We came because, well, we heard the music." The mother frowned. "Music?" "Yes," another answered. "Your daughter was playing the piano, and not just pressing keys. She played with real feeling." The mother's confusion deepened. She looked down at her daughter and whispered, "You never told me you could do that." The girl lowered her head. "I'm sorry." Her mother let out a shaky breath. "Why would you hide something like this?" She sounded hurt, not angry, just overwhelmed. The girl didn't know how to explain it. She barely understood it herself. She had always felt the music inside her, but feelings were different from lessons, and she didn't want to disappoint anyone by trying. So she kept it tucked away, like a secret she didn't dare share. One of the listeners stepped closer, noticing the unease growing between them. "She didn't do anything wrong," the person said gently. "And neither of you are in trouble. Please understand that." Her mother looked unconvinced. Years of working low-paying jobs in strict environments had conditioned her to expect trouble whenever rules were accidentally bent. The girl squeezed her mother's hand, and her mother squeezed back. Another listener, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Do you know how unusual it is for someone to play like that without lessons?" The girl shook her head slightly. "It's not something you just pick up," the person continued. "It's something people practice for years. Yet you played pieces with emotion, control, and memory." Emotion, control, memory. The girl didn't understand all those words, at least not in the way they did. She only knew how it felt when she pressed each key. The mother swallowed hard. "She listens a lot," she said quietly, as if trying to make sense of everything. "When I work here, she always sits near the halls. Maybe that's how she remembers it." One of the listeners nodded slowly. "That explains the memory, but not the expression, not the way she shaped the melody." The girl felt heat rise in her cheeks again, though she wasn't sure why. Their words sounded kind, but also heavy, like they carried expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. One of the listeners walked closer to the piano and gently rested a hand on the edge of it. "Would you be willing to play something again?" the person asked, turning toward the girl. Her mother tensed instantly. "No, please, she already touched it too much. I don't want to cause any more issues." "No issues," the listener assured her quickly. "We just want to understand. That's all." The girl looked up at her mother. "Only if it's okay," she whispered. Her mother stared at her daughter's eyes wide, nervous, but filled with something soft and eager, and something inside her softened too. She looked at the listeners again. "You won't blame her for anything?" "Not at all," they said. "We're here because we want to help." Help. It was a word the mother wasn't used to hearing from strangers. After a long moment, she sighed and nodded. "Fine, but just one time." The listeners stepped back, giving the girl space. The girl slowly walked toward the piano again, her steps uncertain. Moments ago she had played freely, but now everything felt heavier. Eyes watching her. People waiting. Expectations she didn't understand. She sat on the bench and placed her hands on her lap first, trying to steady her breathing. One of the listeners spoke gently from behind her. "You don't have to do anything complicated. Just play something you remember." She nodded. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. She took a slow breath and pressed the first note, a soft, familiar tone. Then another dot, and then the melody returned. A gentle piece she remembered from hearing a student practice endlessly. She didn't know its name, but she knew its shape, its mood, its quiet sadness. The notes floated through the room like falling feathers. Her hands moved carefully, slower than before, but still steady. She didn't want to make mistakes. Not now. Not with all these eyes behind her. But the moment she fell into the rhythm, a calmness washed over her. It was the same calm she always felt when she listened to the piano. The same warm feeling she couldn't ever explain. Her mother watched from the doorway, her eyes slowly widening. She had never heard her daughter play anything, not even a simple tune. She knew her daughter listened to music everywhere they went, but she never imagined she could play it too. Not like this. The listeners exchanged glances again. They could tell this wasn't memorization alone. The girl played like someone who felt the music deeply, not someone simply copying sounds. When the girl finally finished, she lifted her hands carefully, as if the last notes were too fragile to disturb. The hall remained silent for several seconds. It was the kind of silence that held weight. Then one of the listeners exhaled slowly. This is extraordinary. Another nodded. She has pure natural instinct. This isn't something you can fake. Her mother stepped closer to the stage. Is it that good? She asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. One of them nodded. It is. And she deserves a chance to learn properly. Her mother hesitated. We can't afford lessons. I barely earn enough to support us. The listeners glanced at one another again, silently agreeing on something. Then one said, What if the lessons didn't cost anything? Her mother blinked. What do you mean? We mean, the listener said, that the center offers certain scholarships, opportunities for children with real talent. And your daughter clearly has that. The girl stared at them, her eyes widening in disbelief. Scholarship, lesson, talent. These were words she never imagined would be spoken about her Dot. Her mother looked uncertain. I don't know if she's ready for something like that. The girl lowered her gaze. She didn't want to cause trouble or make things harder for her mother, but one of the listeners stepped forward again. Sometimes children don't choose their gift. Sometimes the gift chooses them. And when that happens, we shouldn't ignore it. The mother looked at her daughter again, really looked. She saw the fear, yes, but also the spark in her daughter's eyes. A spark she had missed for years because she was too busy worrying about bills and work. The girl whispered, Mom, I didn't think it was important. I just liked listening. That's all. Her mother's eyes softened with emotion. It is important, she said quietly. More than you know. The listeners invited them to sit on the stage steps, wanting to talk more. They explained that the center had programs for young artists, opportunities for training, and ways to support families who couldn't afford materials or fees. They weren't making empty promises. They were offering a real chance. The mother still felt overwhelmed, but something inside her began to shift. Maybe this wasn't a danger. Maybe it was a door. The girl sat close to her mother, listening closely as the adults discussed possibilities. She barely understood half of what they said, but every time someone mentioned lessons or practice or talent, her heart fluttered. After a long discussion, one of the listeners smiled gently at the girl. If you want this, we will help you. But only if you want it. The hall grew quiet again. The girl looked at her hands small, nervous, but still tingling with the memory of the keys. Then she looked at her mother, whose eyes were warm, thoughtful, and no longer filled with fear. The girl took a small breath. I want to learn, she whispered. Her mother nodded slowly, as if releasing a breath she had held for years. All right, she said softly. Then we'll try. The listeners smiled, relief and excitement filling their faces. The girl didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what lessons looked like, or how hard it would be, or whether she would be good enough. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she had stepped into a world she was always meant to be part of, and it all began with a single note she wasn't supposed to play. The moment the girl stepped away from the piano, the entire hall felt strangely different. The sound of her music still hung in the air, as if the keys kept ringing even after her hands had stopped. People who had come only to rehearse or clean or set things up now stood in small groups, whispering in low voices. Some looked amazed, some confused, and some simply stunned by what they had heard. But no one, absolutely no one, walked away as if it had been an ordinary moment. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. The girl herself did not really understand what had happened. She only knew that she had played because she could not stop herself. The moment she touched the piano, everything inside her came alive. She forgot where she was, forgot who was watching, forgot that she was only supposed to wait quietly for her father. All she remembered was the music in her heart, the sound she wished to release for years, but never had the courage to share so openly. Now, Standing in the center of the hall, she looked unsure of what to do next. Her hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the strange energy that comes after doing something big, something bigger than you expected of yourself. Her father rushed to her side, wiping his hands on an old cloth, as if trying to clean himself before touching her shoulder. He looked worried at first, because he had heard noise from far away, and thought maybe something had fallen or broken. But when he saw everyone staring at his daughter with wide eyes, he felt confusion mixed with something like pride waking up inside him. He asked her softly, "Are you all right?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure if that was completely true. Her breath still felt uneven. Her father seemed unsure if he should ask more questions in front of everyone, so he just stood beside her, as if to shield her from whatever might come next. Then the heavy doors at the far end of the hall swung open again. Two well-known musicians entered, still catching their breath. They had been the ones running the fastest, following the sound that spilled through the open windows. When they reached the hall, they paused, their eyes quickly going from the grand piano to the girl standing beside it. The older one, with silver strands in his hair, stepped forward first. He had played in the biggest venues, taught hundreds of students, and judged more competitions than he could count. Yet at that moment, he looked almost unsure of himself. "Who played?" he asked quietly, as if afraid to speak too loudly. People in the hall stepped aside and looked toward the girl. She felt her stomach twist. Her feet wanted to move backward, but her father's hand stayed gently on her shoulder. "She did," someone said. "It was her." The man walked slowly toward her, not with the attitude of someone important, but with genuine curiosity. He studied her face as if trying to understand how such deep music could come out of someone so young, someone who looked nothing like the trained performers he was used to. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated. She remembered her father's warning about being careful, about not drawing too much attention. She also remembered how people here treated workers like her father. She never wanted to make things harder for him. "My daughter doesn't want trouble," her father said gently, stepping forward. His voice was calm but protective. She only touched the piano for a moment. "It won't happen again." Before the man could respond, another voice spoke up. It belonged to a woman who had been watching silently the whole time. She was known for performing across the country and had a reputation for being difficult to impress. Yet her expression now showed nothing but calm sincerity. "Why shouldn't it happen again?" she asked. "Do you know how rare it is to hear someone play like that without training?" The father looked uncomfortable. "We don't belong to this world. I clean floors here. My daughter waits for me sometimes. That's all." But the woman shook her head. "Music doesn't belong to any world. It comes from whoever can hold it." Her father didn't respond immediately. He looked around the hall, at the shiny floors he polished every day, at the large banners advertising famous concerts, at the people standing around who suddenly paid attention to his daughter's existence only because of the piano. He whispered to the girl, "Did you mean to play like that?" She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The woman stepped closer. "Trouble? You created something beautiful. People run for beauty. They don't run for trouble." The girl felt warmth rise in her face. Compliments were not something she was used to. She wasn't even sure how to react. She only hoped she hadn't embarrassed her father. And the older musician spoke again. "Would you play once more?" he asked gently. "Not for a crowd, not for applause, just for us to understand your gift." The father's first instinct was to refuse. His daughter was shy, and attention could lead to problems. People with power sometimes changed their tone quickly. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something he had not noticed before, a quiet longing, a wish she had buried for years, Because she thought it would never be allowed, Dot. He sighed softly. If she wants to. The girl's heart raced. She didn't know if she wanted to, or if she was simply afraid of disappointing someone. But she stepped forward anyway. Her feet moved on their own, as if drawn back to the piano like a magnet. The hall seemed quieter than before. People didn't whisper now. They held their breath. She sat down at the piano again, her hands hovering above the keys. She didn't know what she should play. She had no sheet music. She had no training. But she had something else, memories. Memories of watching musicians from afar while their father cleaned. Memories of hearing soft tunes in her mind whenever she was alone. Memories of the world outside the hall, full of noise and dust, but inside her mind, full of harmony. Dot, she began playing again. This time, the music was softer, like a secret shared between a few people instead of the whole world. The notes flowed gently, like a small river moving under sunlight. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't something practiced. It was honest. Dot, when she finished, silence covered the hall like a blanket. The woman pressed her hand to her chest as if she needed to steady her heartbeat. The men exchanged glances, the kind of glances people give when they witness something rare. This is not a moment we can ignore, the older man finally said. This girl has something remarkable, something that needs to be shaped, guided, and protected. The father's eyes widened. Protected? From what? The man didn't answer directly. He looked around the hall at the people who now knew the girl's talent, at the opportunities and dangers that came when people wanted something from someone young and gifted. If she continues this path, many will want to claim her. Not everyone will have her best interest at heart. The father felt fear tighten inside him. He looked at his daughter again, at her small hands resting on the keys. What do you want to do? He asked her quietly. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the piano, then at the people watching her, then at her father who had always worked so hard with so little. I want to learn, she whispered. Her father's breath caught, not because he was surprised, but because he finally heard her say something she had hidden for years. The older musician nodded. Then we will help her. The hall was no longer the same. The girl's world was no longer the same. And her father knew that from this moment on, life was about to change in ways neither of them could fully imagine. But for now, he simply placed his hand on her back and guided her away from the piano, knowing this was only the beginning. The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness, as if the world itself was trying to make space for the change that had begun the day before. The girl woke earlier than usual, long before her father even called her name. She lay there in the small room they shared, staring at the faded ceiling, replaying everything that had happened in the hall. The sound of her own music felt like a dream, something too good and too strange to be real. But the look on the faces of those musicians that had been real, their surprise, their respect, their interest. She had never seen adults look at her like that. Her father moved around quietly, trying not to wake her. When he realized she was already sitting up, he paused. Couldn't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Not really. He sat beside her, rubbing his tired hands together. Yesterday was unexpected, he said slowly. I still don't know what I should think. She waited, unsure if he was upset, worried, or simply confused. Then he gave her a small smile, the kind he rarely had energy to show. But I'm proud of you. Those words settled into her heart like warm sunlight. She felt herself breathe deeper. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she whispered again. You didn't, he said softly. You showed something I didn't even know you had inside you. He stood and prepared for work, and she followed him through the morning routine. But as they walked toward the hall, something felt different today. People they passed looked at the girl a little longer. Some smiled politely, Others whispered. She stayed close to her father, unsure of what their looks meant. When they reached the main entrance of the performance hall, the older musician from the previous day was already waiting for them. He wasn't dressed in fancy clothes today. He wore simple, comfortable ones, as if he had decided to meet them not as a judge or a performer, but as a friend. "I hoped you would come early," he said kindly. Her father stiffened a little. "Is something wrong?" "No," the man said with a gentle laugh. "Nothing is wrong. I just wanted to talk before the hall becomes crowded." He invited them to sit on a bench near the entrance. The girl sat between the two men, feeling her heart thump nervously. "I spent most of the night thinking," the man began. "What I heard from you yesterday wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of talent that doesn't appear often. And when it does, it needs to be taken care of, like something delicate and precious." Her father swallowed hard. "We're not trying to change her life suddenly. She's just a child. And I don't want people using her or pushing her into something she's not ready for." The older man nodded. "I understand. And you're right to be careful. The world of music can be beautiful, but it can also be harsh. Many people want to shape young talent for their own gain." Her father looked at her again, just to make sure she wasn't overwhelmed. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. "That's why I want to offer something simple," the man continued. "Not a contract, not a commitment, just lessons. Real training from someone who understands her ability. A chance for her to learn safely, without pressure." Her father hesitated. "Lessons here?" "Yes," the man said. "Here in this hall. After hours, when it's quiet." The girl's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the man in disbelief. "For free?" she whispered. He smiled warmly. "For free. I'm not here to take anything from you. I only want to give you a path to explore." Her father leaned back, letting the idea settle in. He was a man who had spent his life fighting for stability, for safety, for enough money to survive. Big opportunities frightened him because they also carried big risks. But he also knew he had seen something in his daughter yesterday, something he couldn't ignore. He let out a long breath. If she wants it, then yes, she can learn. The girl felt her heart flutter. The world suddenly felt wider, brighter, bigger. The older man nodded. "Good, we'll start today." They walked into the main hall, and for the first time in her life, the girl didn't follow her father toward the cleaning supplies. Instead, she followed the musician toward the grand piano. Her steps were slow at first, unsure. But when she reached the instrument, she felt a familiar calm settle over her chest. The man pulled out a notebook and placed it on the piano. "Before you play," he said, "I want to understand how you learned." She lowered her eyes. "I didn't learn from anyone." "No teacher at all?" he asked. She shook her head. "And you never had a book of music?" "No." He stared at her with gentle disbelief. "Then you play entirely by ear?" "I just play what I feel," she said quietly. The man chuckled softly. "That's even rarer." He asked her to play something simple. She placed her fingers on the keys and played a soft tune she had made up in her mind. It wasn't perfect, but it flowed naturally, like a story she had been waiting to tell. The man listened closely, nodding. "You have instinct," he said, "and instinct cannot be taught, but technique can. Structure can, and once you learn those, your gift will grow." He began showing her the basics, how to shape her hands, how to move her fingers, how to sit with a relaxed back. She tried her best to copy him. At first, it felt strange, like learning how to write again. But each time she pressed a key, she remembered why she loved the sound so much. Her father watched from across the hall, pretending to clean while secretly glancing over. His daughter sat at the piano like she belonged there, like the instrument had been waiting for her. Hours passed without either of them noticing. When the man finally stood, he stretched his back and said, Enough for today. I don't want you to get overwhelmed." The girl stood too, wiping her slightly sweaty hands on her clothes. "You did well," he told her. "Very well." Her father walked over. "How did it go?" She looked up at him with a small, glowing smile. "Good." The man added gently, "Your daughter learns faster than most trained students I've had." Her father rubbed the back of his neck, unsure how to respond. Compliments still felt foreign. As they packed up to leave, the woman from yesterday entered through the side door. She spotted them immediately and walked over with a soft smile. "So it begins," she said. Her father nodded politely. "I guess it does." The woman looked at the girl. "Do you understand what you're stepping into?" The girl hesitated. I want to try. I want to see how far I can go." The woman smiled gently. "Then go far. But never let the world take away the joy you felt when you first touched the keys. Music can open big doors, but it can also become heavy if you forget why you started." The girl nodded, holding those words close. As they walked out of the hall and into the cool afternoon air, her father placed an arm around her shoulders. "Life is changing," he said quietly, "but we'll face it together." She leaned into him. "Thank you for letting me try." "You deserve a chance," he said. "Everyone does." They walked home with steady steps. People still whispered when they passed, but this time the girl didn't feel nervous. For the first time, she felt proud, not because she wanted others to look at her, but because she finally believed she had something worth giving. She didn't know where this new path would lead. She didn't know if she would become someone important or simply someone who played because it brought her peace. But she knew one thing clearly yesterday. She had touched the piano. Today she was learning it. And tomorrow she would continue. And that was enough. The hall behind them remained quiet for now, but inside its walls, her music still lived, waiting for the day it would return stronger, brighter, fuller. The journey of the cleaner's daughter had only just begun.